And thank you to everyone else who did the Tehillim and to Naomi for the Nishmat. I am excited to introduce our speaker today, who's Mina Glick. Mina submitted a very condensed bio, which is exactly this, a simple bio. I have had the zechus to teach Torah for more than 50 years, which does not tell us a lot, but I do know from my own personal experience, the depth and insight of what Mina always has to say. And we are really looking forward to hearing you, Mina. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Good morning. I would say good afternoon, everyone. I'm in Eretz Yisrael. And good morning to those in Chutz La'aretz. And I'd like to learn part of Klal Yisrael's preparation for Har Sinai, coming from Shmos Perek Yutes. I sent you handouts. I hope either they're in front of you or you printed them out, because this is a class that's going to rely heavily on the Dvar Hashem, on the sources themselves. Does anybody have it in front of them?
Yes, we
thank you.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, great. Okay, so I would like to just highlight for you something that we say at the Seder in Dayenu, Ilu Kirvanu Lifnei Har Sinai, V'lo Nasan Lanu Es HaTorah Dayenu. If Hashem would have brought us to Har Sinai and he wouldn't have given us the Torah, it would have been enough. And that highlights the value
She either got kicked off or by mistake she pushed the wrong button. Who's in touch with her?
Me. I'll phone her.
Adele, do you hear me?
We hear you, Naomi.
Okay.
Yes, sorry.
Because nobody's responding, so I wasn't sure if.
Oh,
Yeah, Linda, I think Linda's
Half
calling her right
asleep.
now.
I've tried to call her, but she rejected the call. She's probably trying to get on.
Oh, she's probably trying to get on. Yeah. Okay, so wait a minute. We all teaches us all the midah of tremendous patience, Baruch Hashem. So we're so grateful.
I could just tell you that in her bio, that was just a little bit too short. She is probably one of the most brilliant people I know. And I met her, she married 25. I met her like 35 years ago, I would say. She is a...
I'm so sorry.
Oh,
Then I was on.
I'm sure you're
on a certain
100%
device.
right, Michelle.
Sorry.
I think she's
was on
back
a certain
on.
device.
thanks, Linda.
Yeah, I'm really, really sorry.
No,
On a
chas
device
v'shalom, never
and
be
it-
sorry. We're so grateful. Thank you so much. Never be sorry.
No. It's of my technical expertise.
We're all in the same. We're all in the same boat. We're all the same.
Okay. I'm on a different device. So let's hope that works. Okay. So let's go back to Perek Yutes. I was telling you that there are two descriptions that is revealed in the Song of Dayenu. One that's called Ilu Kirvanu Lifnei Har Sinai. Even before HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the Torah, he brought us to Har Sinai. So there's something called Ma'amad Har Sinai, which is the actual experience that Klal Yisrael experienced at Har Sinai. And then V'lo Nasan Lanu Es HaTorah, then there's another experience of HaKadosh Baruch Hu actually giving us the Torah. So today we're going to focus briefly on some of the insights that emerge from the learning of Perek Shmos of Shmos Perek Yutes. And we're going to start with the first pasuk. The pasuk describes Klal Yisrael arriving at Har Sinai. And what's interesting about this pasuk, which we'll read in a minute, is that the Ramban highlights that it's really it describes their arrival very differently than any other description of their traveling in the Midbar. So you will notice that in Pasuk Beis, Vayisumi Rifidim Vayavo Midbar Sinai, that would usually be the first piece of information that the Torah would give us, that they traveled from this place and they arrived in this place. And then the second piece of information would be the date in which they arrived, which is our first pasuk. Chodesh hashlishi yotzeis bnei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim bayom hazeh ba'u midbar Sinai. On the third month of going out of Mitzrayim, that Israel went out of Mitzrayim. On that day, they came to Har Sinai. So, of course, the Mefarshim explained that on that day is Rosh Chodesh Sivan, and why the Ramban asks, does the Torah deviate from its normal description of the way they travel? And if you look at the handout, number 1 of your handout, the Ramban, and I'll read it very quickly. I'm starting from the third line. The first few lines is expressing that question that we just asked. Avol ba'avur hayos bi'asam b'midbar Sinai, simcha lahem v'yom tov, because by coming, that moment that they finally arrived at Midbar Sinai, they felt a tremendous joy, simcha, and it was a yontif to them. That was Rosh Chodesh Sivan. From the time that they were in Mitzrayim, they were yearning for this moment because they knew that they were leaving Mitzrayim for the sole purpose of receiving the Torah at Sinai. And look at the last 3 lines. Ba'avur zeh hischil ha'parsha ki b'chodesh hashli b'yom hazeh hitchil ha'chodesh ba'u l'sham. That's why in this place the emphasis is on the date, on this particular month, to highlight the feelings that Klal Yisrael had in anticipation of coming to Har Sinai with simcha, with joy, and with as a feeling of yontif. So Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, when he calls him up, that he should say the following to Bnei Israel. And these 3 psukim, Daled, Hey, and part of Vav, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu asking Klal Yisrael, offering them the Torah. So he starts with a description. Atem ri'isem, I'm in pasuk Daled. Atem ri'isem asher asisi l'Mitzrayim ve'eseschem al kanfei nisharim ve'aviyeschem alai. You have experienced what I have done in Mitzrayim, that I carried you on the wings of eagles, and I have brought you to me. Then in the next 2 psukim, he offers them the Torah. And if you listen to my voice and keep my covenant, then you will be a special nation. So the question really that one can reflect on is, why is he starting this offer with a description of bringing them on the wings of eagles? So Rashi explains, and look at number 2, the last part of number 2, al kanfei nisharim. And if you're not following, please stop me. I'm very, very happy to go more slowly. So please stop me if it's not clear. So I'm going to paraphrase the first part of Rashi, al kanfei nisharim, and Rashi explains that the way an eagle carries his young is very different than any other bird, because any other bird is fearful of birds of prey that are flying higher than they, and thereby they carry their young with their feet. But here the eagle, who is not fearful that any other bird is higher, is really fearful from man, of the arrows of man, and thereby he carries his young on his wings. So it says in the middle of that Rashi, on the fourth line, the last three words, Omer. So the eagle is saying, Mutav yikanes hachetz bi. It's better for the arrow to hit me, v'lo bibni, and not to my son. And now Hashem is speaking to Klal Yisrael. That's why Hashem is describing his taking them out on the wings of eagles. Af ani asisi kain. I did the same. I took the, and then it describes how HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when the camp of Mitzrayim and the camp of Yisrael were back to back with each other, and the Anan, the cloud, the protective Shekhinah, was moved to the back and absorbed all of those arrows that were sent from Mitzrayim to Yisrael. So we see from this, in this pasuk, that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu is approaching Klal Yisrael, telling Moshe, this is what you should say to Klal Yisrael, he says right away, I took care of you. You have experienced my care and my love for you. You've experienced how I dealt with you as a bird deals with its own child. So Moshe Rabbeinu comes down to Klal Yisrael with this offer, and they immediately say, Na'aseh. They accept the Torah. And then in Pasuk Yud, Hashem is now telling Moshe Rabbeinu how to prepare Klal Yisrael for this great day. We're going to go back to that. We're going to focus primarily on that point. So now go to Pasuk Tesayin, Vayihi Bayom Hashlishi, Bihiyos HaBoker. So now, after the 3 days of preparing themselves for Har Sinai, Bihiyos HaBoker, and the Torah is specifying as it became morning, and Rashi highlights, look at number 3, Melamed she'hikdim al yadam ma she'ein derech basav adam la'asos kain. That the Shekhinah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the presence of Hashem, the Torah, the pasuk is telling us that the presence of Hashem waited for Klal Yisrael. They were there before, which is different than what usually happens with people. Sheyehei harav mamtin laTalmud. That here the Rebbe is waiting for the Talmud. The Rebbe HaKadosh Baruch Hu waiting to give the Torah over to Klal Yisrael. So he came, Kaviyachol, the Shekhinah came first. Go back to your Pesukim. Pasuk Yud Zayin. Now let's finish Pasuk Tes Zayin. Vayihi bayom hashlishi biyos haboker. Vayihi kolos, and there was thunder, light, and the cloud was heavy on the mountain. And the sound of the shofar was very, the people were from the experience of Ma'amad Har Sinai that I was explaining to you before. Part of Har Sinai was instilling in them this yira. They were trembling. Now, Pasuk Yud Zayin, Vayotze Moshe Esa'am, and Moshe caused them to go out. They were fearful, so he pulled them, he drew them out, L'krasa Elokim, to greet Hashem. And the choice of the word L'kras implies, and now this is Rashi 4, Magid Jahash, page 5, I don't know, probably not. Magid Yatsa L'krasam, it tells us that the Shekhinah was going out to greet them. Kachasan hayotze l'kras kala, like a groom was going out to greet the bride. Sometimes you see at weddings that the kala is coming down the aisle and the chassid is coming towards the kala. This is the imagery that the Torah is describing of HaKadosh Baruch Hu coming to greet Klal Yisrael at Har Sinai. Vayehi pasuk Yutes. Vayehi kol hashofar holech v'chazek ma'od. And the sound of the shofar was becoming intensely stronger, which is different again than what the norm is because usually when somebody blows the shofar, as they keep blowing, it becomes weaker and weaker. And here it became stronger and stronger. So Rashi explains what's the significance of this experience. And why is it I'm reading the end of Rashi? Because the purpose was that as they're experiencing Ma'amad Har Sinai, they're experiencing the sound of the shofar, and as they became adjusted to the sound became intensively stronger. So again, what this reflects is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's exquisite sensitivity to the capacity, to our capacity, that that the shofar is becoming stronger as Klal Yisrael is able to experience it. Now that brings us to a description in Shir Hashirim describing the actual giving of the Torah. Yishakenu minashikos pihu in number 7. Kitovim dodecha miyayim. He has kissed me with the kisses of his mouth, for your beloved is better than wine. So now I want to take you to a description that the Alshich uses. The Alshich brings this medrash later on in Shmos. And this is what he says. V'hu b'ma'amaram zal, b'medrash chazisa, al pasuk yishakeni minashikus pihu. So this is what the medrash explains on this pasuk. Ki kol dibur b'dibur, shehaya yotzei mipi HaKadosh Baruch Hu, every utterance, every statement, every dibra that Hashem said, that came from Hashem, hayam midaber im kol echad Yisrael. So each dibur went to speak to each member of Klal Yisrael and said to them, Makableni at alecha, do you accept this dibur upon you? Kach b'chach mitzvos yesh bi. The dibur is speaking. These are the mitzvos that are included in me. Mekabel es at elokusi b'chule. Do you accept my Hashem? Do you accept my Hashem? So what did each member of Klal Yisrael answer? V'omer hein. Yes, I do. Miyad hadibur hayan noshko al piv. So the dibur kissed that person, each individual person who accepted Torah, kissed each individual person, and then v'haya hadibur halech v'nechkak haluach, and then that dibur went and it was engraved on the luchos. So what we see here very powerfully, and this is something to keep in mind for all of our learning of Torah, that every aspect of Torah, which is the Devar Hashem, is alive. And each one is expressing to us something and asking us, do you accept me? And when we say yes, that dibur is giving us a kiss. And with the power of that vitality, it's being engraved on the luchos. Now, with that in mind, with this emphasis, this is just a general picture and a background of the emphasis of Hashem's love, of the Rebbe waiting for his student, of the chassan coming to greet the kala, of the sensitivity of tailor-making the sound of the shofar to be able to consider what Klal Yisrael was able to absorb, And finally, Yishakenu Nishikus Pihu, that the Dibros are actually kissing each and every person, each and every member of Klal Yisrael. With that in mind, I want to now focus on what did Klal Yisrael have to do to prepare themselves for this great moment. So they said Naaseh, and then Hashem in Pasuk Yud, and Pasuk Tes Yud, is telling Moshe Rabbeinu how to prepare Klal Yisrael. So Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu in Pasuk Tes, in Pasuk Yud, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Lech el ha'am, and this is what we're going to concentrate on. Lech el ha'am, v'kidashtam hayom u'machar, v'chipsusim lasom. Lech el ha'am, go to the people and sanctify them today and tomorrow. So what is this v'kidashtam, and sanctify them? Meaning that now they have to do something that's going to prepare them to become the Am Kadosh. They have to be able to prepare themselves to receive this gift of Kedusha from Hashem. So now let's look at the Ksava Kabbalah together, number 9, the Kidash Tam, the Linireh. I'm not going to read you the whole thing, I'm just going to read parts of it, but this is like something to keep in your pockets always. The Kidash Tam, the Linireh, Shebemilas Kidash Tam, Nichlal Inyan Gadol. In this word, V'kidash Tam, it has embedded in it is a profound lesson. Kimilas Kedusha B'chol Makomos Inyano. And now the Ksav HaKabbalah is explaining what the concept of Kedusha is. Number 1, Haprisha v'Havdalah, His Alus v'Hisromamus Mikol Inyane B'chutei Ha'erech. The separation, the Kedusha means separation and elevation. Person separates from something and thereby he becomes more elevated, more connected to Hashem. But now he uses a very interesting term. The separation and the elevation is mikol inyane pechute ha'erech, to all things that are of lesser value. Now that's very, very interesting insight, very interesting choice of words, because what the implication is that in many areas of becoming a kadosh, in some areas there's an absolute no, but in other areas it's a very gray or personal decision. So when you're saying what is considered for each person of lesser value? And then he divides this process of being elevated in Kedusha in three levels, one more than the other. And the third highest level is when a person is completely immersed in Torah, completely immersed in Kirvas Hashem. So now we're on the 12th line, the end of the 12th line. Hine Amar Hashem. So now in this place, Hashem says to Moshe, El Moshe, Ma'amar Kolel, very interesting insight. In other words, the Torah is telling us, Hashem said to Moshe, V'kidashtam hayom u'machar, make them, sanctify them. But he doesn't give him any specifics of how to go about doing it. And that was deliberate. He said it in a general sense. Why? The Ksava Kapal is going to explain. V'kidashtam hayom u'machar tzalomar, sheba'osan shnei hayomim, in these 2 days, yishtadel imahem, ad shekol echad, mipi koach nafsho, each person with his own capacity should work. Koach nafsho yeh parush v'nivdal mipichito Utius Yitzro Hara B'Tivo. Each person has to go into his own personal lab and figure out what pulls me down, what makes it hard for me, what stops me from reaching the goals I have in Kirvas Hashem, in developing closeness to Hashem. And for each person, it could be something else. So the deliberate general statement is that Moshe Rabbeinu was teaching each individual member of Klal Yisrael, in order for you to stand at Har Sinai, in order for you to receive the Torah and become the Am Kadosh, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Every person has to work to, number one, identify what's pulling them down, and then to have the clarity to realize that that thing that's pulling them down is of lesser value, and then work to prevail to overcome that and become removed from it, separated from it, and thereby becoming more elevated. The Yiskadal, the Yisramam Alav, and thereby he will prevail over his Yetzer Hara. V'hu Yesod Kol HaTorah Kula. And that's the foundation of all Torah. Number one, that process of moving past oneself, whatever pulls a person down, and that process of becoming thereby more elevated and examining each thing and seeing what's difficult and what I need to separate from in order to move forward with my life. Now on the 19th line, Sha'al Yidei Chen Yitnu Leiv. Now the part that I skipped, I'll paraphrase for you. So the Ksava Kabbalah now is saying Hashem gave Moshe Rabbeinu this directive, the Kidashtem Hayom U'Machar, and you sanctify them. So what did Moshe do during those 2 days to help Klal Yisrael be able to go into their personal lab and do the work to become a kadosh for themselves, to know what it requires of them to become a keli for kedusha, what's going to pull them down and how to separate from it. So what did Moshe Rabbeinu do during those 2 days? So the Ksava Kabbalah explains that Moshe Rabbeinu taught Klal Yisrael Torah. He taught them Sefer Bereshis. He taught them up to the parts where they were standing at Har Sinai. And with that, the Ksava Kabbalah explains that they understood. If a person learns Sefer Bereshis, they see who the Avos were. They see who our forefathers were. They see how Kadosh Baruch Hu related to them, and the rest of the world and all the generations before that. And they see how Kadosh Baruch Hu directs the world with reward and with punishment. And he also taught them the mitzvos that they already had, the Shiva mitzvos b'nei Noach, and the mitzvos that they received at Mara. And now we're in line 19. Sha'al Yidei Chen. So through this learning process with Moshe Rabbeinu, Yitnu Leiv, now they were able to concentrate, to focus, Laleches, Yitnu Leiv, Laleches B'darkei Hashem, the Lishmar Mitzvosav. In other words, to articulate for themselves, I want this. You're exposing me to the Derech Hashem in the world, and now I want this. Number one, v'hodi'an mitzvos shenitztavu b'nei Noach, and then he taught them the mitzvos. Go to the last part of this explanation, line 29. Kol eila hadavarim kalal hu yisparach l'Moshe v'amro elav kitashtam hayom u'machar. All of the above, everything that we said was packed in to that phrase that directive to Moshe Rabbeinu, V'kidashtem hayom umachar, sanctify them. Ratzalamar, what does this mean? Direct each member of Klal Yisrael, sheyishtadel l'sader lifneihem, inyanim eile, asher al yadam yechanech adam es nafsho, that he should work to put this before him, all of this directive of identifying what's difficult for them and what they and how to separate from that those things that are pulling them down, and va'al yadam, and through that whole process, yechanech adam es nafsho, the person is educating himself, lehis alos el madregos hakadusha, to become more elevated in his levels of kedusha, v'lios mufrash umuvdal mehavle ha'ol upchitito, and thereby becoming more separate from or removed from those things that are of lesser value, and keep moving up. So what we see from this, and this is what I want to leave you with, that today, teaching today, is the first day of Shalosh Smei Hakbala. It's the first day of this preparation that Klal Yisrael was directed to do. And Gvul Hakbala means boundary. It's creating a boundary for yourself that will bring you to this V'kidashtem hayom umachar. And what that requires of a person is, number one, a person has to go in for them to themselves. This is a very individual process, to their personal lab. And they have to first identify what's pulling me down, what's pulling me away from Hashem. And the formula that I very often say in terms of this process is, number one, this is my goal. The person has to articulate that for himself. This is where I am. And a person has to be brutally honest with themselves where they're holding. And now how do I close the gap? And closing the gap is two strategies. The strategy of the measures that I have to take to close the gap, and also to identify what are the barriers that hold me back from achieving this goal. So if we learn from what Klal Yisrael experienced during these days of preparation, you see how they prevailed in becoming the Am Kadosh, because they heard the Torah from Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu taught them Sefer Bereshis, as we said. He revealed to them the principles that the world was built on, Sachar v'onesh, Hashkachas Hashem, and mitzvos. So the first thing is, through that, a person gains a certain clarity. I want this. And that strengthens a person to be able to move towards their goal, as difficult as it might be. And through that, they will have greater clarity, and they will be able to move beyond themselves to greater and greater levels of Kedusha, Yehi Ratzon, and you should all have a beautiful and Simcha Dika Yontif. Thank you. I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Mina. That was beautiful and so apropos for all of us at exactly this time. Does anyone have any questions?
Yes, I do. So, Mina, my name is Charlene Rubinstein. And it's my fault that you're lecturing today, because I gave your name to our group. I really want to thank you very much. But the question about boundaries, when you want to apply it, I mean, I'm struggling with boundaries my entire life. And it's very difficult to separate and yet give that stuff and about other people and myself. So my question is, I mean, is there a Torah technique You say you have to go fearlessly deep into yourself to figure out for yourself. But since you're a teacher of many women over so many years, did you develop a method or a way to be able to do that work of boundaries? Is very easy for me to give, but to stop is hard. But I know I have to stop because then I destroy myself. So it's a struggle almost every day.
Right. But I think that there are different aspects of boundaries that have to be teased out, because it seems to me that what the boundaries that you're describing are boundaries that need to be set, in an interpersonal relationships with other people. And that's very, very important. That skill is extremely important. And then there are also boundaries that a person sets for himself in terms of the world, and identifying those things that pull them away from the goals that they have in their connection to Hashem. And they're not two different paths, obviously, but it has to be teased out with greater depth to be able to know which skill is required for which part of that process. So it would be hard for me to weigh in on this right now, but it requires definitely a more exploration.
So there is a vertical direction with boundaries, me and Hashem, and then this horizontal one around me.
Yes, excellent.
And they meet in a diagonal. So where is the diagonal? I'm just, it's okay. I understood. What you said.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you very much. חג שמח.
חג שמח.
מועדים לשמחה, חגים מוזמנים לששון. That's a Sephardic way. Take care. Thank you.
I think that one of the most important insights in this Ksav Kabbalah for me is that when you imagine Klal Yisrael at Har Sinai, and each person was there receiving the Torah and becoming the Am Kadosh, and each one went through a personal journey. It wasn't a collective experience of becoming, of figuring out what I need to do to become a Kadosh. But each person had to have that process for themselves. And each person.
That's what I like about when you mentioned something that Hashem kisses you when you do your personal approach to Torah. Until today, you kind of get a neshika, a kind of an armor almost. Neshika, nesicha.
Right,
it's like you get the bite, but you get the immune system to figure it out. So I like that concept. It really helped me.
Correct. There's a Kedusha. Kedusha goes two ways. A person creates himself builds himself, I should say, as a vessel to receive, as a vessel, and that's his part of the Kedusha process. And through that, he's receiving the gift of Kedusha from Hashem. So it's a constant mutual dynamic of building self and receiving greater levels of Kedusha. And we learn that a Kabbalah makes mention of that in a different place.
Can I add something?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. For me to learn how to set a boundary, it was the opportunity to understand that if I set boundary, if I love myself, if I take care of myself, I will be able to help other people more. In this case, set a boundary, it's to help you to grow, to become the best, but at the same time, like flame, Havdalah, you separate holy from mundane. It's flame who go up, and when we can take care of ourselves, when we do something that we enjoy, that we love, we become like a flame to other people because we get the energy. We fall in love with Hashem, with ourselves, and with other people. It's just very simple. Remember, if you set a boundary, you do this to help other people. It's not your selfishness. No, you tell Hashem, I love myself in order to help more people to be connected to you.
Yes, that's a very important thing to keep in mind. Absolutely.
Can I ask another question?
No, just to say, I just want to interject 1 second. It's Nomi. I just want to, I think what Mina is trying to get across to us is that Kabbalat Torah is not about our boundaries between other people and the boundaries that we feel that we have to create in our lives in order to exist, which is a very big it's a very big point of narrative within this generation. You know, this generation is very into the concept of my personal boundaries. I think what Mina is really trying to get across is the concept of what it is when we go into Kabbalat Torah, is what are the boundaries that are stopping us from being able to completely create a relationship with the Ribbono Shel Olam? What is it that is creating that boundary that is not allowing us to fulfill that point to get close to Hashem? And I think that is what has been really been taught in this concept. It's not our personal boundaries between Adam la Adam. It is not anything to do with that. It's not the personal happiness of how I'm going to feel by creating boundaries within myself. It's what is it when we're going towards Kabbalat Torah, the thing that we need to all ask ourselves is, what does it mean to receive the Torah? And how can we make ourselves a kalim, a kli? What is stopping us from receiving the Torah in the way of us having the deepest relationship with the Ribbono Shel Olam, and for us expressing our divinity, choosing our soul over our ego?
I think it's barriers, not boundaries, right? Barriers, maybe.
I want to just refine what you were saying for 1 minute, okay? Because I want to be very clear as to how the use of boundaries functions within what we were speaking about in Kabbalat Torah. The boundary is not what's stopping me. The boundary is used to help me. I'll give you an example. If a person is standing on a roof and there are no rails at the end of the roof, then that person is going to be very fearful to explore anything on that roof. He's almost going to be fearful to move because he's afraid he's going to fall off. If there are rails on that roof, then he can walk around, then he can explore, then he can build himself. So the boundaries that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us in Torah, whether it's kashrus, Shabbos, Taras HaMishpacha, those boundaries are what helps us build ourselves. That's A. B, now there are other kind of boundaries. There are boundaries that I'm setting for myself because I have an agenda for myself to be able to develop as an Eved Hashem, as a servant of Hashem. So let's say there's a gray area. I could be involved with a group, and the group, it is, many different kinds of people, many different kinds of philosophies. And I mean, I could just speak about myself. When I was much, much younger, I was 17 years old. I started college straight out of Beis Yaakov. And I myself, no one knew about this to this day. I set certain boundaries for myself when I was walking into that secular school because I wanted to hold on to who I was. And if I didn't set those boundaries, it would have been much harder for me. Now, those are boundaries that also include a person's growth for Kedusha and for Hashem. So the boundaries is what helps a person. It defines who they are. So even in the morning when we start brachos, we're defining who we are. We're defining Shalo Asani Gai, Shalo Asani of it. And by saying that, we're defining by defining who we're not, we're defining who we are. So a boundary is I'm walking into an environment, and even though I wanted to be in that environment, I chose to be in that environment for certain reasons, I also knew that there was a lot in that environment that's not me. And I created those boundaries to be able to stay clear to who I was and what I believed in and what I wanted. So those are the boundaries that we set. That's another level of Kedusha. You hear what I'm trying to say? So the boundaries are not what's stopping me. The boundaries is what's keeping me.
Beautiful.
You understand?
Absolutely, it's beautiful. Can I just ask a question in terms of the timing? So if Hashem told Bnei Israel at Har Sinai how to prepare themselves in terms of separating and elevating, did they go on that personal journey in 3 days so that they were like, how did that happen?
Actually, it was an accelerated program.
Wow.
They did it in days. But of course, don't forget, they did it in 3 days, which gave them that process. And Moshe Rabbeinu taught them Torah. And through that teaching of Torah and teaching of mitzvos, in terms of, oh my goodness, in terms of, I'm sorry, my phone now has to be plugged in. Through that process, which it does sound extraordinary because it takes us a lifetime and then some, but, don't forget that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, was building them into Klal Yisrael for the past 50 days, 49 days of Sphira, and, of what we count in Sphira, and they kept going higher and higher, greater and greater. So when Moshe Rabbeinu said to them, "V'kidashtem hayomu machar," they were ready for that whole process to be able to do that measure of preparing them for Kedusha, of what's pulling me down, what's of lesser value. And I love that phrase of lesser value, because if any person who reflects on themselves as they develop, there are things that I remember when I was 15 that was so burningly important. And today, if I look at it, it's of lesser value. Now, I'm not putting a value judgment on it. I'm not saying it's bad, it's good. It's just in my life right now, it's irrelevant.
Right.
So that's what happens. As a person develops, these things just become irrelevant. And that's the pechitus erech. That's of lesser value. That's what's so beautiful in that term, because we're not saying bad or good, because there's a tremendous subtlety in developing in Kedusha. It's very personal and it's very subtle. And as a person keeps growing and developing, things become irrelevant, certain things. And 10 years before, it was very relevant. You know what I'm trying to say? And that's a very personal journey. It's so beautiful that this is what Klal Yisrael was engaged in during those 2 days. It's a true paradigm for us through life, and certainly in preparation for accepting Torah.
Can I say something? Thank you so much. It's incredible.
Let me reassure you, it's going to take more than 2 days.
I think maybe perhaps what helped with the 2 days is that they saw Hashem's love clearly, like you said before, exactly what you started with, the Anania Kavod and the Yitzias B'Trayim and the Kriyas Yamsuf and all that. That love gave them the impetus to do all that work and to really, I think that's a very big foundation for us to remember how much Hashem loves us. And also to put in tefillah, because we can't really make all those boundaries and do everything ourselves. We need Hashem's help. So if we use tefillah together with what you're saying, that's going to speed everything up and bring Mashiach, I hope. Thank you so much for this.
No, that's very, very
I don't want us to keep Mina much longer because we already went over our time. Mina, thank you so much. This was really what we all needed. And Mitzvah Hashem, we're going to really focus on these next few days to bring ourselves as close as we possibly can and do our work. Thank you so very much, and wishing everyone a great Yom Tov.